Kochendorfers are, to me, very representative of the difficulties that were overcome by Minnesotans during the formative years of the state's history. I think that their family story resonates with many people who have similar stories, perhaps, or who have stories maybe aren't as dramatic as the Kochendorfer story, but are, I think, very meaningful to them in the same way. I'm Dan Munson, and I wrote a book entitled Malice Toward None: Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, the Homestead Act, and the Massacre and Inspiring Survival of the Kochendorfers. I saw Abraham Lincoln as a pivotal figure throughout the history that surrounded the Kochendorfers, both because he was a lawyer in Illinois, very close to where the Kochendorfers were living in the mid-1850s, and he was the inspiration, the driving force behind the events that triggered the Civil War and the Homestead Act, which then resulted in the Kochendorfers taking up farming again near Redwood Falls. The book tells the story of the Kochendorfer family of Minnesota as their family story intersected with American history in the 1850s and 60s. And then later it tells the story of how well the survivors, the family, took care of one another and took care of the tremendous legacy that their surviving ancestors left them. Over a Memorial Day weekend, I was at Oakland Cemetery, which is the oldest cemetery in Minnesota, very near the state capitol, visiting some of the grave sites of my ancestors on my father's side. On the east side of the cemetery, there's a gravestone which reads Kochendorfer, and there are three names there: Johann, 38, Catherine, 36, and Sarah, 3 years old. The inscription beneath what reads, "Victims of Redwood Falls Massacre, August 1862. But then I began later to ask myself the question, how is it that they came to be buried here at Oakland Cemetery, which is a good 100 miles from Redwood Falls? And I Googled the name. I learned a little, just enough to get me more interested. And then I went down to the Minnesota History Center and asked the nice people there if there was any information there on the Kochendorfers. And sure enough, there is a privately published pamphlet or booklet detailing the family story. The Kochendorfer family immigrated from Germany in the late 1840s. They arrived in St. Paul, early fall of 1857, and Father Johann had a team of horses that he was hoping he could use to perhaps start a farm, but he instead, given the price of land in and around St. Paul, decided to go into the drayage business, moving goods about town. And in his travels, he learned of the wonderful land that was going to be opened for farming in the near future along the Minnesota River upstream from Mankato. But he didn't have the money or the time initially to be able to do that. It was the passage of the Homestead Act in 1862 that allowed him to take his farming skills and then apply them to begin farming again in Minnesota. In the Homestead Act, a U.S. citizen could secure up to 160 acres of public land free for a very nominal registration fee. The Kochendorfers began farming on the north side of the Minnesota River, just upstream from Redwood Falls and just above the river valley. And on that morning of August the 18th, when some of the Dakota warriors began attacking in that area, the older children of the four, Johann, Rosina, Catherine, and Margaret, ran down into the creek ravine as their parents were being attacked. And they made it 11 miles to safety, where they waited for an ox cart to come up from behind them and caught a ride to Fort Ridgely. These 4 children are sent back by steamboat in early September 1862 from Fort Ridgely. They end up in St. Paul, and they are looked after by the members of the church that their parents had joined on arriving in Minnesota. Those 4 children, when they landed on the St. Paul landing, were orphans in the center of a continent. Those 4 orphan children who were put with families in the St. Paul area in 1863 grew to adulthood and all started families themselves. The oldest son brought the remains of a father, a mother, and a small child back to St. Paul and had them reinterred at Oakland Cemetery, July the 8th, 1891. The detailed genealogy that is now kept by the family lists 1,000 or so descendants of those 4 children that were orphaned by those events in 1862. In my opinion, the family's success and the aid and comfort that was provided to them in very difficult circumstances in those days is a real testament to the good sense and charity of the people of Minnesota. I'm happy with the book. I think it appeals to different readers on different levels. It's not a purely history book written for historians. You'll learn some history as you read it, but it's the family story that I think carries your interest through, and that's the thing that's been so heartening to me as a writer, is that people who don't normally like to read history say that the book carried their interest quite well throughout because they wanted to follow the family story.